Welcome to the Adventures in Arting podcast, where we analyze, explore, and celebrate the creative journey. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and I'm a working artist living outside of Boston. I've been hosting this podcast with my super special co-host and my mom, Eileen Balzer, since 2012. Hi, Mom.
Hello, Julie. I feel like I've had this whatever I have, miasma, since 2012. So
Yeah.
you'll excuse me if I turn off my sound and cough, or if I stuff lozenges in my mouth.
Yes, I have an unwrapped lozenge ready to go. My 4-year-old has brought home every disease humanly possible, and we all get it. So it's very exciting. So there are 2 in-person classes coming up. One is called Funny Faces, Creating Portraits with Personality at the Monastery Gallery of Art in Connecticut on Saturday, May 4th from 10 to 4:30. May the 4th be with you. And all materials are included as well as lunch for $135. It's a 1-day class. We're going to be making super fun faces. We're going to be doing a mixed media collage. Come and play with me. I'd love to see you there. And at my home studio, I'm teaching art alchemy, exploring golden brand paints and mediums, June 23rd through 25th. So I'm really looking forward to that. Everybody is going to leave class with a reference library so they understand how golden paints and mediums work, when to use them, when not. You'll get a sense of, come use my art supplies basically, so you can decide what you want to buy for yourself. It's a really fun way to treat yourself. Some people come, I've had people come with girlfriends, with their child, sisters from who live far away from each other have come. It's always a good time. So I hope to see you then. You can find out about all those in-person classes at juliebalzer.com. Just click on the learning tab or the in-person classes.
Just want
Okay.
to say, when you say with your child, you mean above a certain age.
Yes, I do. Usually adult children. It's appropriate for adults. Yes, you're right. This is episode 150, hard to believe. I think this is going to be a situation where it took us 10 years to get through 100 episodes, and it's going to take us another 2 or 3 to get through the next 100. So we're going to go from slow to fast, I guess. But the episode, the listener mail episode is really because you might recall on episode 139, which was titled "What is Your Why?" I had an epiphany or a discovery in which I really discovered that a big part of my why for making art is that I'm all about connection, and I'm interested in connecting with people. And I think that while I read all the comments that people leave and the messages that people send, I would like to have something that's a little more conversational. So I thought it was worth discussing. And I'm kind of thinking of this as a micro topics episode because lots of good points got brought up. So we're going back to episode 137, which was titled Beginner, Intermediate, Advanced, and Alice left this comment. She says, a very thoughtful and useful talk. I would say that style is something that shows up in your artwork regardless of the art medium that you are using. Picasso used various mediums such as paint, ceramics, and sculpture. However, it is easy to, pardon me, cough coming. However, it is easy to recognize his work in the different mediums he used. Julie, I think you have a particular style, whether you are painting, collaging, printmaking, or making a quilt. Also, it was interesting that you pointed out that the work you produce can be limited by your studio space. I knew that, but hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned that. I would really have loved to make etchings, but I don't have the space or money for the press or the chemicals that are needed for that process. I have found ways to make art that work around my circumstances. Thank you to you and Mom for taking the time for these podcasts. So thank you, Alice, for that comment. And I thought we might talk a little bit about why you think people have a particular style regardless of the medium. I mean, me and Picasso, clearly, we both do. Uh, or what do you think contributes to that ability? So, Mom, do you have any thoughts about this?
No, but when she was saying she wanted to try etching, but she couldn't, didn't have the space, etc., she could do what you've done a lot of times, which is take a course
Hmm.
and you get to use the materials in the art room there, and you get to talk with the teacher and other people about ways you can access the materials without having to buy an entire press. And often there are places in a community where you can rent time. You've done
Mhm.
that with a printing press recently
I
and
have.
an
I
art
mean,
associate.
it is still expensive. It's not as expensive as buying like a $7,000 press, but it is still like time and money and all that kind of stuff, and I
Right, but
get
it's
it.
a way to see if
Yeah.
you like it.
Mhm. Mhm. It's absolutely true. So I've been thinking a lot about like why does style show through that somebody can make a bunch of different kinds of paintings or a bunch of different kinds of art forms and they still have a particular style. And I think, I mean, it's not science, so I don't actually know. I sort of think, although I would argue that a lot of science is thinking, not knowing too, but that's a separate conversation to have another day. But I think it's really because there is a strong point of view. And what I mean by that is that there is a direct connection to how that person uses the tools and they don't try to hide their use of them. It's almost like handwriting,
I
right?
was just going to
You
say handwriting is very hard to disguise,
Mhm.
and you have to be very deliberate about it. And you can draw all the little hearts you want over the eye when you're in third grade, but it's
I was
still
in
your
middle
handwriting.
school when I did
I'm
that.
sorry, late bloomer.
But yeah, and I think that there is something about like I think sometimes when they say you could tell a spy by if you made them do math or count really quickly, it's very hard to do it in your non-native tongue, even if you're super fluent, because you just numbers are one of the things that you think about that way. And I promise I have a point. But the other way they used to say that they would find spies is they would put a piece of pie in front of them because particularly Americans need to start from the tip of the pie, where most other people will
Good
start,
point. Good point of the wedge.
yeah, will start anywhere on the pie from the crust, from the side, whatever side is put down in front of them. And Americans would always turn the plate to face them. So an easy way to pick out a spy. But what that made me think is that so often I think when people make art is they're trying to be something else. It's like they're trying to speak in this second language. They're trying to behave in a way that they or create art in a way that they think artists should instead of in a way that's native to them and natural to them. And so what ends up happening is that you sort of don't have a consistent style. You get lost a little bit in it, which is one of the reasons I tell people that it's so important to embrace who you are, to embrace your natural proclivities, embrace the way that you use things, your sense of color. You can get better at everything. You can refine things absolutely. There's an old joke that I've heard many times from people who came out of Smith, which is a college, and I believe it's still a women's only college. And what this a couple different graduates I've heard say is that um, they get a freshman class full of a really wide array of different, exciting, intelligent women, and somehow they manage to graduate a Smith woman every single year, an entire class of these kind of very made similar. And, I've heard a couple of them talk about it as kind of a joke that there's a type, but there is this question of like, do we through education get assimilated into some kind of like form, whatever school that is, even if it's art school. Like some people have said that going to art school, they can tell who went to, what art school based on how they make art because you get kind of assimilated into a process. So I think it is so important to listen to your voice, to think about what you're passionate about, to lean into all your little foibles and the things that make you particularly you, because I think that's what gives your art a particular style.
As an aside,
Mhm.
that would make an interesting podcast. Let's say to have three or four people who went to different art schools and they talk about the process of being there and what they took from it, what they liked, what they didn't like.
Mhm.
That would be an interesting thing.
I agree. I leave it up to you to find the guests and bring them
Oh,
on.
for crying out loud.
Okay, so Ellen also responded to that podcast and she said, I believe that art is constant evolution, and this is where art and life intersect. Personally, I prefer process classes versus product. I want to be challenged to think. And this made me think about things. So Ellen's been on the podcast, and I don't and think she would remind me saying she's recently retired from her job. And it made me wonder if wanting to be challenged to think is something that comes with age, because I certainly didn't feel that way, I think, in my 20s. I think I felt very threatened when people challenged me to think. So, like, are you born a person who wants to be challenged to think, or does it develop with age, or is it like a skill you can develop? Like, how does that work? What do you think, Mom?
I do think that some people are more open and less defensive at first go, but you can uh, try to learn that.
Hmm.
You know, it doesn't mean that in your brain you're necessarily more receptive, but you can learn to be quiet and listen. And then what you do with it is up to you. I think it's just like learning when you're little, oh, you have to share. You may not want to share, but you can learn to share or to at least make a semblance of pretending to share. I do think that if you are really wanting to learn, you have to be able to listen. Unless you're
Yeah.
really an unusual person who knows everything.
Although let's discuss that I think listening and being challenged, or like being wanting to be challenged, are two different things. You
Well,
know, the
there's
same
also
as like,
the issue of if you don't do something, the best things for learning are when you do something that's hard for you, and then ultimately you succeed to a certain extent. I think that's much more satisfying than just doing something that's easy. I mean, if
for
you
sure.
challenge me to learn to ice skate, that would be more challenging for me, although I can ice skate. But then I'm challenging me to go to the grocery store and buy a quart of milk. I mean, it's just there are things that I do regularly, and then there are things that I don't do regularly.
Yeah, but that's not about like finding pleasure in challenge. Like, I think
No, but I
that,
think there is a factor in people who like challenge
mhm.
that they get pleasure from it.
Yes, but that's my point, which is like, can you teach yourself to find pleasure in challenge, or is that just something that is like the way that you are or not?
My view of human beings, which may be kind of Pollyanna-ish, is that uh, you're never totally static and formed, that you can continue to change through life. You just have to want to.
Right. Like, and I believe that growth is a choice.
Mhm.
Change is often a choice. And so the question is, if people want to learn to find pleasure in challenge, which I think, so this is, so I have brought this up many times because it's just so true. But one of the things that James Clear says in his book Atomic Habits is, he says that people who like exercise a lot or eat really well or any of these things don't have more willpower than people who don't, but they live lives that make it easier for them to do those things. If you are all friends with people who run, chances are likely that you're more willing to run. If you're all friends with people who go out drinking on the weekends, chances are you're more likely to go out drinking on the weekends. If everybody in your family, likes to eat leafy green vegetables, chances are that's what you're eating. If everybody in your family likes to eat fried food, chances are that's what you're eating. And so he talks a lot about sometimes when you want to change a habit, it's like a much bigger idea of what you have to change. And I think, anybody who's gotten sober has had this experience, or made any other major change where you sometimes have to let people go out of your life or radically change that the way you live in order to bring the new habit into your life. And so the question is, in terms of like taking pleasure in challenge, I think you have to think about whether you're surrounding yourself by people who also like enjoy that process, who like, if you are going to accept being challenged, but other people in your life aren't willing to be challenged, it becomes a really unequal relationship. And that can be really trying and exhausting. But if you feel like you're in a partnership or a relationship with friends or whatever it is with other people who are like challenging and pushing themselves and they're finding excitement and growth in it, then that will probably help you feel yourself. And so I do think that there is something about the people you associate with that can help you or hurt you in terms of being open to challenge.
The other thing that I want to separate is challenge and competition are not the same thing. Some people
Yeah.
love competition and some people don't.
Hmm.
And if you don't, you should not think of challenge as being competitive with other people. It's a choice, but it's not a choice to compete. I
You know,
think
it's so interesting. I never thought that we were talking about challenge in terms of competition with others. I always thought of it as challenge, as challenge meaning against yourself. But I can see how it could be considered. But I think competitive with others and challenging yourself are so different in terms of the mindset.
well, I think they may be, but what I'm saying is sometimes you challenge yourself in a way that makes competitive against the clock, for example, or I have to lose 100 pounds by this time next year, or so you set goals that may be not possible for you
Yes, if
for
you lost
whatever
100
reason.
pounds, you would literally have no bones or skin left. So that would be frightening.
But
Uh,
attractive.
I mean, beauty standards being what they are. So I think like what I'm coming down on at the end is that I think people can grow into wanting to be challenged. I think that I very much enjoy being challenged intellectually. I very much do not enjoy being challenged physically.
Yeah.
I very much enjoy being challenged creatively. I do not enjoy being challenged like financially. I mean, like, I think everybody has areas in which they enjoy the challenge and areas where they don't, and that's okay. But I think to grow creatively, if you can learn or help yourself towards finding um, challenge creative and intellectual challenge to be exciting or pleasurable, that can be really helpful to making it an easier way to grow. It's just easier to grow if challenge is exciting. I know, like, athletes say this all the time. They train to failure, they you know what I mean, all that kind of stuff, and it makes you stronger. You're supposed to do enough reps so that your muscle fails, so then you get stronger and you keep going. But like, I don't want to push myself like that at the gym, so then I don't ever improve. And like, that's my choice. But I think the same thing is true of your artistic muscles. So those people who find pleasure in pushing themselves all the way get better faster because it's easier for them because they find pleasure in it.
Well, I would just say that's why it's important to know yourself, to understand
Mhm.
yourself before you seek a challenge. I could sit around all day and say, I want to learn to draw a cow, but really, A, I don't care about it, and B, it would be very hard for me.
Yes. Yeah. And like, I think that's one of the things that's so upsetting when people poo poo a skill that you've taken a lot of time and energy to acquire because you worked hard at it and you deserve the credit for having worked hard at it?
But that again is, when you say people, that again is the reason to continuously surround yourself and seek out people whose opinions you care about.
Yes.
Everybody has an opinion,
Hmm.
but everybody's opinion is not equally relevant to you.
Right. And seeking out people who want you to succeed and who seek to hype you up, not to push you down. That's very important too. Okay, so the next episode we're going to talk about is episode 138, Julie's constructed exhibit at the library. T Bear left the following comment. She said, "Your abstract pieces are intriguing with a hint of mystery. I really like them. Another fantastic episode. Based on your process of preparing for the exhibit, I was thinking maybe you had to sprint quite a bit when your preference might be more of a marathoner. Something to ponder." And I thought it was a really good metaphor. And actually, you and I were talking this week about what's the rhythm of your art practice, like what's the speed at which you like to train, and how can you kind of discover or develop this. So, I
Well,
mean, you know me pretty well. Am I a marathoner or a sprinter?
you are both. When
Hmm.
you first learn or are learning a new skill or a new technique, you're obsessed. Literally, you cannot stop doing it. You cannot stop thinking about it. And you do 40 of them. Uh, on the other hand, you're capable of putting things down and then going back 6 months later or even 6 years later and reworking it. You paint over old paintings and you leave little bits of it peeking out, but you're ready to move on. I think um, one of the things that you do is you do marathons in bursts, but you also respond really well, whatever this is your personality, to time constraints. You kind of like that. I think one of the things you did a lot used to was take on these internet challenges of 100 days of X because you like that limitation of time. And I think uh, there's also limitation of material. So take these four things and make all your art out of these four things. I mean, that's interesting to you. That's compelling to you. So one of the reasons I think you one of the reasons I think you're good at a lot of uh, the work that you do, including the business of art, is because you're not daunted by taking on a giant project in a limited time. You don't give up. You don't say, "Oh my God, I will never be able to do this." You just give up sleep.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've always thought of myself as a binger.
Yeah,
And I think that's exactly what you described, which is like, oh, there's this thing called Chine Collet. I'm going to do this 100 times with 1,000 things and go all in until I feel like I've mastered it and I know what's going on. And then goodbye. And maybe I'll come back to it later and maybe I won't. But it's an interesting, not, let's nix that word, but it's a complicated cycle. And so I do feel that I I am sort of we all contain
obsessive. You're
multitudes. Yes, I'm
obsessive
obsessive.
about things.
Absolutely.
About
Okay,
everything, though.
can
And
I
about
just say
some
that this
some
reminds me of the fact that the internet has recently convinced me that I think I have adult ADHD, which seems impossible because I can have long areas of concentration and stuff. But I've started. There's been all these videos in which they've been like, if you think like this, you probably have adult ADHD. If your brain works like this, you probably have adult ADHD. And so, like, one of the things was if you don't miss people, you probably have adult ADHD, and I don't miss people. Not because I don't love lots of people, but like I'm happy when I see them and I'm fine when I don't. And I always
I
thought that
would
was because
be careful of being diagnosed
I was by the internet.
with mental illnesses or physical or,
Mhm.
yeah, by the internet,
Well,
by someone you don't know,
project just
know
because
you.
that's project binging is also supposed to be an ADHD. I don't know. Anyway, the internet is trying to trick me. This is like when you take some sort of rare diseases class, and on the first day of class, the professor says, you do not have any of the diseases in this class. Let's just say that at the beginning, no matter what happens, you do not have
Right.
any of them. And then throughout the period of class, everyone at some point thinks they have at least four of the rare diseases because
Yeah.
we get that way when we hear like if you this happens then you might be.
A random group of symptoms is a whole lot different than having someone actually analyze you, test you, all
Mm,
these things. It's if everything was so clear, then everyone would get a diagnosis immediately. In the
that's
world to come, we will all get. I mean, this is like having AI,
mhm.
artificial intelligence, tell you, "Oh, you have ADHD," and then it turns out that it thinks you're a dog. Do you know what I mean? And
Yes.
just there's a lot of reliance on other people telling you things instead of thinking for yourself. I think that's one of the things that a lot of times the internet does to you. It makes you think that, oh, there are these wise people out there who know more about you than you know. Be careful.
Well, yes, although I think 'cause sometimes it's also I think, well, I've never had access to this information before. Perhaps this is new information I have to think about. Okay, so one of the things I would say is, what is the usefulness about knowing the rhythm of your art practice? Like, why does it matter to know that I'm a binger, or to think if you're a marathoner or a sprinter, or like however it is that you like to work, you know? And one of the reasons is because the more you know about yourself and how you work, then the more able you are to find a process that works for you, understand how long out you need to get something done, to be able to figure out like if you want to acquire a new skill, how long you should expect that to take you. And I even find so my husband is definitely a reflector, and he takes him time to process and reflect upon something. And I have just learned, we have just learned that I will say to him, like, well, what do you think of this? And he'll be like, I need to think about it. And that annoys me because I am like, pop, 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 pop. Let's think right this minute about it. Right. So, but I have come to acceptance that the next day he really will, he does reflect on it, and he will
Yeah.
say like, oh, this is what I think about that. Whereas if I say I'll think about it, what I really mean is, thanks for
Go
saying
away.
that. Go away. I'm going to ignore you now completely. And the second I said I'll think about it, it dropped out of my head. So, but again, it's like I know how he's going to react, he knows how I'm going to react, and like it just helps us get along better. It also helps me, I think, be more patient and calm. And then knowing my own working rhythm, it helps me to plan out my day, to understand what kind of organizational system is going to work for me. Because I'm a binger and I get all in, I have to block time, meaning some people are very good at getting a variety of things done in a day. I am not always great at that. Like I just want to in my workday be like,
Wallow.
we're doing all the email. We're doing YouTube comments. I just responded to a comment from like 11 years ago today because I'm on a YouTube comments kick. Like, I am a binger, and I know that about myself in terms of how I deal with things. So
But then
that's
you
how,
can also be forgiving of yourself. For example, when you're starting something new, so you're investigating a new art supply, you will let yourself, you will say, should I buy this? It's expensive, but then there's this other one, maybe I shouldn't. Don't punish yourself. You can afford it. And you just get the stuff and stop whining about it.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's again like I know that my comfort level is with certain things, and there are certain things that I'm like full steam, go ahead, let's do it. And there are other things that I'm very much like, let's wait and see, let's see if this is worth it, again, as always, self knowledge is power, right? So, this is a comment you should like mom because she agrees with you.
Yay.
Vicky says about the same podcast 138, Julie's constructed exhibit at the library. Great podcast. Your discussion about how creativity should feel really interested me. I agree with Eileen's very wide scope view of creativity. Essentially, creativity is problem solving that transcends both the problem and the solution. I have found that my creative process has infiltrated, infected every part of my life, and I solve all problems differently now. I thought this was such a great comment and
I'd
so
like to
many good
know
points.
how she now solves things that she used to not do. I would like to have her write in and tell us what give us some examples, because I think that's a fascinating observation.
Well, speaking for myself, and I think that I've heard this from a lot of other people, when I got brave in my art, I got brave in my life. When I found that I was able to take risks in my art, I found that I was able to take risks in my life, and vice versa. When I loosened up in my life and became less controlling of things, I found that I was able to loosen up and become less controlling of things in my art. And it does beg the question, like when they talk about art imitating life and life imitating art, is this what they mean?
I don't know if it's imitation, but I think You can find that something that's been a guideline in your life isn't a necessity. And I'll just go back to something I've said to you before. When I was a young mother and I started taking an exercise class 3 times a week, so it was an hour, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I started to do something that I have never done. I had never done before that, which was people would ask me to meet or do something. And I would say, I can't, I'm busy then. I didn't explain. I just learned to say, that time is blocked off. And it enabled me. First, I was amazed that people would accept it. And then I realized I don't have to be at everyone else's beck and call all the time. I can have a life in which I make choices, and I don't have to say yes to everything. And it really expanded into my other areas of my life. I know that sounds like such a little thing, but it's not. It wasn't for me. And I think whatever it is that you're doing that's important to you, it can teach you that some of the other things, some some of the ways you face the world in other areas can be altered.
Yeah, I think we are whole people, which is to say, you know, the the negative version of it can be true. If you're being treated very poorly at work, it can chip away at your self-esteem and who you feel you are and bleed over into all sorts of other areas of your personal life. If you're under an enormous amount of stress from something, it can change the way you feel about everything else in your life. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we are constantly talking about happiness and mental health and all this kind of stuff, is realizing that you can't do that. What's that TV show where they basically have the procedure where they don't remember like they go to work and they don't remember anything about their outside life, and when they leave the building they don't remember anything about their work life. Do you know what I'm
I
talking about?
haven't seen that, but are you talking about it's like a Men in Black kind of thing?
It's not Men in Black. It's this is gonna make me crazy. I can't remember the name of it. But basically, it's the idea that they're completely separated. You literally have no idea what you do at the office the second you walk into the building. And you literally, when you're in the building, you have no idea if you're married, you have no idea where you live, you don't know what your name is, like you know nothing about yourself,
I've
basically.
never seen that TV show.
We watched Steve and I watched a little bit of it, and he said it made him too anxious, so we quit at some point. But it's a fascinating idea, because the fact of the matter is we can't separate ourselves as much as we'd like to. You want to separate yourself from trauma, you want to separate yourself from something bad that's happening, or a bad experience, or a situation that's not great, but you can't, right? And so I think that that's part of the reason why, when learn to like accept mistakes in the process of making art, maybe you're kinder to yourself in accepting other kinds of mistakes. And so when art and therapy get mixed together in that way, I think that, meaning not a like formal way, but in a more sort of self-help way where you're taking care of yourself and almost healing some things through learning to do them in art. I mean, I have to say, I think one of the enormous keys to me being in recovery for being a perfectionist is figuring out that art requires a certain level of imperfection. And I've had a big shift and change in my art this year, and a huge part of that was this one line that got told to me about making my work less democratic. And like, what have I been told my whole life is to be well rounded and to be, you know what I mean, to make everything sort of even and to like be good and to like, do it correctly. And like the ultimate perfectionism thing is that now I'm very interested in making all of my work um very lopsided in some ways and not democratic. And I do wonder how that will flip over into my life as well, that I don't have to be a well-rounded person. I can be fabulously lopsided.
You know that's one of the things that I think when you think about applying to college, a high school student, and high school is like the only time you're supposed to be good at everything. Supposed to be good at math, supposed to be good at English, supposed to be good at a sport. I mean, in real life, people are not equally good at all areas,
Mhm.
nor should they be, and that a lot of times the people who are most uh, attractive to colleges are people who have spent a lot of time in one area and
Mhm.
gone deeper than the average person, and that message from a lot of high schools where you're supposed to be good at everything is actually not a great message because nobody is good at everything, and you
Right,
feel like
although I think it's really hard when, like, if you got straight A's in English and you got D's in everything else, and maybe you're an English savant or a literature, pardon me, savant, like, that doesn't that's, like, not the profile of a quote unquote "good student." It's not like with the
no, but it's not
value
the
we
idea is
put.
to be a person who has deep interest in something.
Mhm.
So you're good in English, maybe you have written really fascinating poems. Maybe you have been working at a bookstore and presenting book readings. I mean, the point is, if I were looking for someone to round out a college class and be
I hear your
exciting to
point.
other people, I'd want some people who
I
are,
hear your point. I just don't think that's the way that it works.
well, it should work that way. And I actually think
Agreed,
that more
but
than
it
you think
doesn't.
it does. One of the things that one learns is that even if the academy tells you, "Oh, you're not good at everything," you can say, "That's right. I follow my interests."
Yes.
You
I
know,
mean, here's the thing. I think like in adult people, also for like the good of society, also for like lots of other reasons, specialization is fantastic, important for personal happiness. I mean, there's so many reasons why specialization is a good thing. I think like this is a much bigger conversation about education and like the values that we put in education, which then spread into the whole of society. Like, there's no reason that anybody should have to know about everything. And
well, and in
yet,
fact, the amount of knowledge that's out there, you can't. You
right.
literally can't know everything.
Right. And then there's definitely an argument for the fact that essentially by consistently choosing people who are sort of good at getting the grade and kind of good at everything, what you're actually getting is people who are very mediocre, as opposed to getting people who are fabulously lopsided and have some immense talent in one particular area. So I hear your argument. I don't disagree with you. I just don't think that that's the way that things work right now. But we can be the change, mom, and fight
That's
the
it.
power. So Estella also commented on episode 138. She said, I look forward to your adventures and arting podcasts. I usually hear something thought provoking and learn from your process and way of thinking. Remind me to come back to that way of thinking comment, by the way. Whenever I embark on a big project, I'm usually so deep into it, I don't see its value to my growth until it's done.
That's
If
not surprising.
possible, right. It's hard for everybody to see that. If possible, then I can properly reflect on it and see it from a new perspective. So I can relate to your experience of list making and moving through the steps until completion, which feels more like work than creative and pleasurable. It's wonderful that Miss Eileen is your biggest fan, as well as having a critical eye for something you may have overlooked. Her reflective perspective on the library art show while walking alongside you was awesome and loving. I appreciate how she framed it as a creative act. It's a perspective that I will carry with me as I create and share my work with the world.
Well,
So,
that got back to the importance of having people in your life who uh, care about you and care about encouraging you, but don't feel like they have to tell you what to do.
mhm,
They can respond to what you are doing. And uh, I think people, here again, we were having this discussion the other day. You had some friends in elementary school, and then people started to fracture. Friendship groups changed, and some people uh, didn't want to be your friend anymore. But then there was someone else who did. I think the point is, uh, you have to assess if you're not getting out of a relationship with someone what you need. It doesn't mean you have to cut them off completely unless you want to. But what you need to do is don't think that their opinion is should be weighted the same as the opinion of someone else who's respectful of you and what you're trying to do. I just think that people need to figure out what makes them feel good about being with someone. And I don't care if it's a relative, I don't care if it's your boss or your coworkers. There are people who are going to make you feel good and want to do things. And then there are people who are going to always try to make you feel bad.
Yeah, as
Why
they
do that
say,
with
don't take advice from anybody you wouldn't, or don't take criticism from anybody you wouldn't take advice from, right? Anybody you wouldn't go to advice for.
always consider the
Always
source
consider the
before you
source.
assess what they're saying to you.
Mhm. So I had flagged for discussion in my notes the
Well, wait,
part.
you asked me to
Yeah.
return you to that other piece.
Yes. Okay, so I had flagged in my notes this question about I don't see its value to my growth until it's done, and I wanted to talk a little bit about evaluation. But I was when I read it a second time here just now, I was thinking about this idea about learning from process and way of thinking, and partially because one of the projects that I'm embarking on right now is I have this new membership site that'll open up at the end of May. And as part of it, I've been going through this very interesting process of codifying a lot of my thinking processes into worksheets that people can fill out so that they basically can, think creatively the way that I do and extrapolate some ideas out and all
Well,
this
they
stuff.
can
And it's been,
ask themselves
Mhm.
some of the questions that you
Yes.
ask. They won't come to the same answers, but
No.
they will. It's a way of approaching thinking about your work.
Right. It's like I've just been it's like codifying my methodology into something concrete that somebody else can take and run with. And it's been such an interesting process to have to figure out like how my brain works, how I actually break ideas down and to put in a cute little worksheet that people can, download and print out and fill out and use. And so I've been testing them out on my husband, my
Ooh,
my poor unsuspecting husband. So we had to go for a little bit of a drive today, and so I started running him through a worksheet and quizzing him. And when it worked at the end, because I was like, "So, Stephen, why are you interested in marketing?" And like we worked our way through this whole thinking worksheet to come to an answer, and it was such a good, rewarding process for him to basically work it out for himself. It was like being able to transfer my brain into his brain. It was very exciting. Anyway, so that's a separate issue. But let's talk about evaluation for just a minute and the fact that you can't see your growth when you're in it. That's a
well,
given,
because you may
right?
not realize it's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, physical growth wise, I see this all the time with my son and his friends. Like I hadn't seen one of his little friends for a while and I saw her at the playground and I leaned over to her father and I said, "Oh my god, she's gotten so tall." And he was like, "Oh yeah, I guess so." Because of course he sees her every day, but I hadn't seen her for like maybe a month or two and it was like a shocking moment for me, you know? And I think again, there are other kinds of growth that are like that, but you can't see it because you're in it. Now, how do you see it? That's the great question. How can you trick yourself into seeing it? One way I think is to keep old work. I was at the thrift store today where I got these fabulous earrings. But I was at the thrift store today, and one of the things that the thrift store always has is artwork that people have discarded. And a lot of times you can tell that it was like practice artwork. So today I was poking through the canvases because there was a huge bunch of canvas that had come in, which unfortunately the thrift store priced in a way as if it were art instead of a canvas. So I did not walk away with any of them. But and it was clear that they were kind of more like sketches, practice. Do you know what I mean? Some of them were very unfinished, etc. And I
Any
had,
dogs playing poker?
well, no, it was not dogs playing poker. It was a lot of abstract work and some sketches of stuff. But anyway, one of the things that I was thinking as I was looking through them is I was like, understand why this person got rid of them. Maybe they're moving or it just takes up a lot of space or who knows. But I also think like this is a reflection of who you were. And if you lose that, then you don't understand that you have grown. So you can do it digitally. You can keep photos of your work and then every now and then look back at it and say, like, how are some ways that my work has changed? Or what would I do to this work now? You know? Um, and I think the same thing. That's why sketchbooks, notebooks, art journals, whatever you keep that's in a book can be really useful because that's an easy way to look back and see what's happening.
Diaries.
Yeah, all that stuff. And so I'm at the end of design boot camp right now, and one of the things we've been talking about is how to know when your work is finished. And I said, once the work is finished and it's met my three criteria, then it's dead to me. Like, it's done. It's dead. It's a dead work of art. And then I said, but here's the scary part, which is after a little while, it comes alive again because my three criteria for a work being done are that one, it feels like me, right? It's this is back to the style conversation we had, but it feels like me. The second thing that's important is that it communicates whatever it is that I set out to communicate at the beginning. It doesn't mean it has to look like a certain thing, but if I want to make like my artwork is essentially um has certain ideas that I want to get across, and so either it does communicate that or it doesn't, and only I can be the judge of that. And then the third thing is that I've gone through all the technical aspects of it, and for me that usually means through all the principles of art, and I'm sure that it is satisfied. At that point, when it has satisfied those three things, it's dead to me. The problem is, as I grow, as I change, as I learn, it comes alive. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this dead painting on my wall, and it's alive now, and it says, "Fix me. I'm not good anymore." Right. And that is the process of growth. And at that moment, what I know is that I've grown or I've changed because it's alive again and it needs me to fix it. And I think that if you don't have your old artwork in some way around you, then you really can't see your growth. You really can't understand it. And that's the other thing, which is I think you have to do a certain amount of navel gazing. And I don't mean it in like the self-indulgent way that navel gazing sounds, but you do have to do a certain amount of really looking at yourself, thinking about yourself, writing about yourself so that you can move forward. I don't think you can move forward without looking back. That's my personal opinion, is that you need to have a sense of what came before, why it came before, in order to make choices that help you move forward ahead. And I think that's true in many different ways, not just in art. Um, but yeah, I think evaluation is one of the biggest keys to moving forward in your art and should be a regular part of everybody's art practice.
It's not just art. Improving anything involves looking back,
Mhm.
figuring out what you were trying to do, figuring out what made whatever you did, whether it's baking, you know, designing clothes, writing a play, taking vacations with your family, and then figuring out what's not working anymore due to a lot of different changes,
Yeah.
and then figuring out what would work going forward. I just think that uh, we're back to a theme we've hit before, which is change is an inevitable part of being alive, and to improve things, your life, whatever, you have to constantly be aware of that, be accepting of that, and figure out the things that you can change to make your life feel better. Sometimes it's just cleaning up messes, which is what I was doing this afternoon. You're going to be stunned by this, but I've started to work on the mess on my bedside table. And I'm excavating all kinds of things that I forgot were there, or that are no longer useful to me, or that are wonderful and I want to put them somewhere else so that I can keep them together. I just think that sometimes you need to have the junk of your brain somewhere and then go back
Mhm.
and look.
Okay, so our last listener mail of the podcast, our last mini podcast here is from episode 139. What is your why? Susan says, "This is a terrific podcast, Julie, and I aim to go through this process for myself soon. Find myself wondering what difference it might make in your classes if we started out with this process or did it as homework before the class and introduced ourselves to each other with a synopsis of our creative why. I suspect it would help us connect with you and with each other and help us identify how the class would help us achieve our specific goals. Just a thought."
I think it would work for some people,
Mhm.
and I think some people would be so intimidated that they would never take the class.
Yes. This has been one of my biggest struggles as a teacher in the last few years, really since I started teaching design boot camp, is that the students who have this sort of base of knowledge versus the students who don't, teaching them in the same class is sometimes difficult, right? Complicated, shall we say.
Basic knowledge about the art that they're making, or basic knowledge about themselves?
It's both. I mean, a huge part of design boot camp is not just a like, listen, you can get the principles of art, and the elements of art out of any book or internet. Right now, you could Google it and you could find it. A huge part of the class is understanding yourself in context with them, how you use them, what you like about them, who you are as an artist, what kind of art you like to make, what kind of art you like to look at, what kind of meaning your art has, like all that kind of stuff, right? That's what it is. So, when I am talking to people about something and trying to get them to go somewhere with it, it's always it's very different conversations at the same time. And I think the same thing is true about, like, if you know your why, you're having a very different conversation with than somebody who doesn't. Both, I don't think you have to know your why to make art, and I don't think that you have to know your why for me to be able to teach you. Do I think that it's a shortcut that makes it easier? Yes. And I think that it is, so this is a struggle that I have, is trying to sort of match everybody up. And that's actually one of the big reasons that I am creating this new membership site that, that's opening at the end of May, because I wanted to find a way to level everybody out. Do you know what I mean? So that we're all have like the same information to a certain extent. And also so that I could teach higher and higher level classes, but not scare the beginners, because beginners are so important and they bring so much life and energy and they have great questions. And I would say, like, it's such an interesting thing because in design boot camp itself I get a wide range of people, and I often find that people who are beginners ask the most helpful questions because they're not afraid to not know, because they know they're beginners, right? And so it's like I was trying to wrap my head around, like, how do I bring beginners in and make them feel comfortable and empowered while at the same time offering advanced level students advanced level ideas. And so that's a lot of the thought process of what I'm working on, which is neither here nor there. But I do think that if you haven't figured out your creative why, a couple ways that it can be useful, not to reiterate that whole podcast, but a couple ways it can be useful is because you can then figure out what you want and what you don't. Like, it just makes picking easier. It reminds me of, like, someone once said, if you understand the values of your company, it makes it a lot easier to hire somebody, because you just can say, does this person align with my values? It's not whether I like them. It's not whether, any of that stuff. Like, you could have 5 candidates that I like them all. They're all really nice. They all have the right talents and experience, but it's who aligns with the values of our company, and that makes it really easy. So if you know your why, then you can decide, is this class for me or not? Is this art supply for me or not? Is this artwork working for me or not? Is this process working for me or not? Is this crit group working for me or not? Because I understand my why, I can make those decisions in a slightly, I don't mean colder, but maybe more
More
intellectual, less
useful to you.
emotional. Yes.
More useful.
Yeah. So I do think that Susan is right. It would help shortcut everything, but I don't know how I don't know how practical it is the problem. But yes, it would
Well,
shortcut everything,
especially if
absolutely.
you have this wide variety of students,
Mhm.
you want to always encourage new people to
Yes.
enter this process.
Mhm. I
Uh,
agree.
so, so you need to think about that
Mhm.
because one thing I know about you is you're very inclusive and you don't want to make it this small elite group on a higher plane
Right.
somehow.
I don't want there
Then
to have to be like prerequisites and all this kind of stuff. But I do remember like when I taught my a year of gelatin printing class, I got a lot of pushback from people who didn't want to have to take the prerequisite class in order to take the other a la carte classes. And at the end of the day, what I said is I just don't want to have 100 of the same question come up because I've taught everything a very particular way and I'm teaching a very particular thinking process. And I just need you to go through that very particular thinking process in order that everything else is a shortcut instead of having to re-explain, re-explain, re-explain. It reminds me a little bit of I've been reading a lot of serialized fiction that is on the like I don't want to say it's lowbrow, but it's definitely like more in the like penny novel kind of like history or whatever you want to say. And so there's this thing that every single one does because it assumes that you may not have read the one right before, where it like recaps for at least an entire chapter. And it drives me crazy every time because I'm like, just get into the story. You know what I mean? Or like the story needs to stand by itself without all of that. And so I feel like that is the same as true for a lot of these other classes. I remember when I took the class about using the printing press, as we were discussing earlier, so that I could rent out time on the printing press. This woman was saying there is a great class that you can take, which is like a printmaker sampler, and they go through, all the different kinds of printmaking that you can do with the press. And somebody said, "Oh, do we?" And she said, "But just be warned, the first day or the first 2 days of class are all about using the press. So it's a repetition of this class." And somebody was like, "Oh, can we just skip it then and just come later?" And she's like, "No, you can't. You have to go back through it all again."
let me ask you, just because I'm curious,
Yeah.
did the people who were concerned that they didn't want to sit through those 2 sessions with you, or did you didn't want to sit through the previous class? They wanted to just go into this class, the
Yeah.
gelatin, because
Yeah. Yeah.
did they generally end up taking the class, or were there
No,
people who
they did
didn't?
not. They did not. They and then many of them were people who are very experienced gelatin printers, which I completely appreciate. Although I also understand that everybody else has like a different way of doing it, and that's also fine. There's not one right way, but I would say almost across the board, it was a hard no,
Okay.
which is fine. Um, but I do always think that it's an interesting is a wrong word. I am often surprised by how strongly people resist relearning stuff. Like these people who didn't want to take the printmaking class for the press because you had to go back through the printmaking for the press beginner intro stuff. I do think there is a benefit to going over some basic information again because you never know what you might have missed or what you pick up differently or even being a resource for other people in the class. I'll also particularly say with a online class where it's not like you physically have to sit through it, I also wonder sometimes why people are so resistant to it, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so just to wrap up here, we love comments. We hope that you will leave more comments. We hope that you will send us email. We love to hear from you what you're thinking about the episodes, the thoughts it brings up for you. I want to hear about your art practice and how we are hopefully helping you with that. Also, to know the class Practical Colors for Painters is ongoing. You can join that class anytime. You can find it at balzerdesigns.com. Color is a foundational part of making art, so you can join me and a lot of great students for a wonderful interactive workshop that breaks all of the complicated ideas down into simple and practical lessons. So thank you as always for being here. Mom, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to shout out?
No, but I would say this. It turns out that talking about art really is sort of a form of psychoanalysis, because
Mhm.
if you it makes you think about why you're doing what you're doing and what it is that interests you about it. And I think that's one of the things about art in general, not just applied art, but could be dance, could be writing plays, it could be anything, cooking, that what you do, there's it's never just random.
Mhm.
there's always kind of a structure or grid to the way you approach things.
Mhm.
And so it might be useful in a lot of ways to think and to talk about more deeply what are the kind of guiding principles that you may not realize you follow for any of these approaches.
Mhm. I definitely think like this is the old you can't separate the art from the artist, which is why it's so hard when you find out that an artist is a Nazi or a pedophile or another problematic figure, which is the question is how can you enjoy or support the art knowing that it came from that person and from their perspective? Very hard to separate. On that cheery note, if you want to connect, you can find me at juliebalzer.com or all over social media as at Balzer Designs. I hope you'll sign up for the free weekly newsletter. That's the best way to make sure you keep up on the latest news. There's a big button on the homepage of juliebalzer.com where you can do that, or you can go to the show page for this podcast to find the link. And if you'd like to help the show, you can leave a review, mention us on social media, or tell a friend. All of those things help other people find the show. So thanks so much for listening and subscribing. We'll see you the next time on the Adventures in Arting podcast.